Tambra lived in the noisy oil town of Warri, Delta State, a place where even the sun seemed to hustle harder than most people. Yet she herself moved as if effort was a forbidden sin, a woman whose laziness had become so legendary that neighbors joked her. Shadow arrived 5 minutes late because it was tired of following her. Married to a man named Priya, Tambra formed half of a couple that could only be described as a disaster wrapped in excuses. For both husband and wife treated work like a deadly disease, something to avoid at all costs, spending their mornings snoring like satisfied crocodiles, while other men and women rushed out with determination stamped on their faces, and by noon they would still be glued to their broken sofa, eating whatever leftovers remained from yesterday's survival. Elders in Warri often said that a hand that refuses to work will soon stretch itself out to beg, and no proverb ever fitted to people better than it fitted Tambra and Priya, because Tambra was not poor by accident, but by choice, relying shamelessly on her 5 siblings who had escaped the struggle of Nigeria only by embracing harder struggles abroad. One becoming a nurse in America, another a banker in London, one an engineer in Canada, another a doctor in Germany, and the last a hotel manager in Dubai, all of them working long hours, enduring racism, loneliness, and exhaustion, yet still remembering their old mother back home by sending money regularly. Tambra, however, saw their sacrifices not as kindness, but as entitlement, sitting proudly like a self-crowned queen, folding her arms and waiting for Western Union alerts to vibrate her phone, celebrating each transfer like a festival while contributing absolutely nothing in return, screaming Priya's name excitedly whenever money arrived, dancing in their tiny parlor as if she had won a national lottery. But her joy never lasted long because greed had poisoned her gratitude, making every amount feel too small, every sacrifice feel insufficient, and every sibling feel stingy no matter how much they sent. If one sibling sent 100,000 naira, she complained it couldn't even buy respect. If another sent 200,000, she accused them of forgetting the suffering of their childhood, twisting memories of shared hunger into emotional blackmail, abusing the very people keeping her alive, forgetting that without them she and her husband would have starved quietly into invisibility. Priya, weak-voiced and guilt-ridden, once dared to suggest finding work or learning a skill, but Tambra shut him down with insults sharp enough to draw blood, calling him a coward and mocking his manhood until silence became his safest language. And from that day he surrendered completely, choosing comfort in uselessness over confrontation. As their lives drifted meaninglessly between sleep, food, television, and complaint, empty like a drum with no rhythm. Then, one ordinary morning, as Tambra lay half asleep, gripping her phone like a lifeline, a call came from London, and with no greeting or concern, she demanded money before even asking about her brother's health, only to be struck silent when the voice on the other end broke under sorrow and delivered news that cracked the world open. Her mother, the woman whose suffering had raised them all, had died quietly in her sleep. Tambra cried loudly, dramatically, rolling on the bed as though grief itself had hired her as an actress. Yet beneath those tears something dark was already forming, because when her brother explained that all 5 siblings would return to Nigeria for the burial, carrying their foreign currencies and savings, Tambra's grief transformed into calculation, her mourning into strategy, her mind racing with wicked possibilities that made her lips curl into a smile too dangerous to be innocent. For where others saw loss and reunion, Tambra saw opportunity, and as she ended the call and stared at the cracked ceiling above her, the seed of a plan was planted, one that would soon turn family into victims, love into currency, and greed into a weapon sharp enough to destroy everything in its path. The news of her mother's death sent shockwaves through Tambra, but unlike the rest of the family, her grief was merely a curtain behind which her mind danced with schemes. For she quickly realized that the 5 siblings returning from distant lands would bring with them not just sorrow, but money, wealth earned through hardship and long nights abroad. And while they mourned, Tambra and Priya began to plot like predators in the shadows, speaking in whispers that slithered across the broken floorboards of their tiny house. For the couple decided that instead of humbly accepting gifts, they would orchestrate a plan to take every naira they could from their own blood. And so Tambra called on Ratio, a ruthless young man whose reputation in Wari was whispered like a curse in alleys. A man who could kidnap, intimidate, and extract wealth without remorse, while Priya, sweating and shaking, agreed only because he could not see a way to oppose his wife's merciless determination. And together they began mapping the comings and goings of each sibling, memorizing flight times, car models, even favorite routes and shops, so that when the moment came, no detail would be overlooked. Sister Blessing was the first target, a woman radiant from her life in America, unaware that returning home would plunge her into danger. And as she left their house to visit an old friend, her expensive perfume leaving a trail of nostalgia and safety, 3 masked men appeared from the shadows like phantoms of terror, smashing her car window, dragging her screaming from the vehicle, blindfolding her, tying her hands, and throwing her into the back of a van that roared like a lion, while Blessing's cries were swallowed by the engine and the rough roads, and she felt the world tilt into chaos, into fear she had never known, until she arrived at an abandoned building reeking of urine, dust, and neglect, where a tall man with a voice like grinding metal demanded a ransom of 20 million naira, giving her 3 days to comply or face death. And while she sobbed in terror back at the house, confusion erupted as her absence ignited panic among the siblings, who scrambled to locate her, calling, praying, begging, and selling anything they could to gather the money, unaware that behind closed doors, Tambra and Priya smiled like foxes feasting on the vulnerability of their family. And when the ransom was delivered, Blessing was returned, pale and broken, her American confidence shattered, and Tambra quietly checked her phone to find her portion of the ransom, 10 million naira, already credited to a secret account, and she whispered with wicked satisfaction, 1 down, 4 to go, while Priya swallowed his conscience like bitter medicine, knowing they were dancing with danger. And over the following weeks, Tambra's calculated cruelty unfolded like a dark festival, with brother Tari kidnapped for 50 million naira, sister A for 25 million, terminal for 18, and even Goss Power himself, the eldest brother, was snatched, each time the family bleeding resources to save their loved ones, and every successful ransom deposited secretly into Tambra's account, swelling their hidden fortune until they could afford a mansion hidden in the outskirts of Wari. 5 bedrooms, swimming pool, expensive cars, designer clothing, while publicly pretending to be poor and humble, acting the part of beggars while secretly swimming in wealth. But Tombra's mind did not rest, for the next target was even bigger. Chief Ebik, her rich uncle, a man whose golden mansion, imported gardens, and expensive taste glowed like a beacon of opportunity, and she envisioned a ransom that could secure a lifetime of riches. While unknown to her, the universe was quietly aligning forces against her, because every act of greed, every scheme of cruelty, every tear faked, and every trust betrayed was a thread in a web that could one day snap back. And as Tombra leaned over Priya that night, whispering the plan for her uncle's capture, the shadows seemed to lengthen in the room, as if the walls themselves were watching, and far away the city of Wari buzzed unaware, while the first true test of morality, fate, and consequence began to stir silently, promising that while Tombra's path glittered with stolen wealth, it was paved with danger, betrayal, and a reckoning that neither she nor Priya could yet imagine. And in that silent, tense moment, the reader could already sense that the forest of greed they had entered would soon become a jungle where every predator, every victim, and every bystander would fight not just for wealth, but for survival itself. The moment Tombra learned that her uncle, Chief Abik, a man whose wealth was whispered about in every corner of Wari, and whose mansion gleamed like a slice of heaven fallen on earth, would be returning for the burial, her mind ignited like fire on dry grass. For this was not merely another sibling to extort, but a treasure trove, a golden opportunity to collect more money than she had ever dreamed. And as she shared the plan with Priya, her voice lowered to a conspiratorial whisper that carried both greed and danger, the two of them mapping every detail of his life from afar, noting the black Range Rover he favored, the quiet streets he drove through, the time he spent in his office preparing documents, while Priya's heart pounded with dread, yet his mouth betrayed his fear by agreeing to every step, because his wife's will had long since become a law in their home. Tombra contacted Risho immediately, instructing the young, merciless kidnapper and his team to be ready for precision, for they could not afford a mistake with a target so high-profile. And as she outlined the plan, her eyes sparkled with the kind of calculation only someone who had learned to treat human life as currency could possess. While outside, the city of Wari moved on, oblivious to the storm about to descend upon one of its most prominent citizens. And 3 nights before the burial, Chief Ebekami left his office late, listening to nostalgic high-life music, unaware that fate had already intercepted his route, because, as he turned onto a familiar street, 3 masked men appeared from the shadows like specters, blocking his car, smashing windows, and dragging him out with force so precise it was almost artistic. While he shouted, demanded recognition, tried to invoke his status, but the kidnappers saw not a powerful lawyer, but only the promise of millions in naira, bundles of foreign currency. And while he was shoved into the waiting van, his mind raced with disbelief, fear, and a desperate hope that this nightmare could end. All the while, Tombra watched from her room across town, phone in hand, giving instructions to ensure nothing went wrong, her heart beating like a war drum of triumph. And as the van sped into darkness, she imagined counting the ransom, planning which secret accounts it would go into, how she and Priya would transform their tiny, broken home into a palace hidden from prying eyes, while inside Chief Abakimi's mansion, Prima, his young, cunning wife, was unaware of the abduction. Laughing over a video call with her lover Faye, plotting ways to inherit and escape the old man's wealth, completely blind to the danger unfolding mere kilometers away, and when her phone rang with a raw, unfamiliar voice, delivering the shocking news that her husband was in their captors' hands and that 50 million naira was required for his release, Prima's mind raced, not with fear, but with calculation, cold as ice, imagining a way to turn this chaos to her own benefit, her own greed perfectly matching that of Tumbra, creating an invisible collision course of evil and ambition. While back in the van, Chief Abekami felt the panic, the sudden weight of mortality pressing down on his chest, realizing that in an instant his comfortable life had turned into a deadly chessboard, where every movement could be fatal. And yet, the more Tombra plotted, the more the universe whispered that no matter how clever her schemes, every act of cruelty and deceit planted seeds of consequence. For the same hands that seized could also be seized. And as the van rumbled through darkened roads, the city lights glinting faintly off metal and mirrors, Tombra and Priya envisioned their empire, blind to the moral storm forming quietly, because, in their minds, every kidnapping, every ransom, every tear extracted from family was a step toward untouchable power, and while fear, suspense, and human desperation converged on one van filled with a terrified man and a cold, calculated crime, the reader could feel the tension snap like a drawn bowstring, knowing that the golden trap Tombra had set was about to unleash consequences far beyond even her darkest dreams. And in that silence, before chaos fully exploded, the scene was set for a collision of greed, family loyalty, and survival that would forever change the lives of all involved. As the van carrying Chief Abakimi disappeared into the shadows of Wari's outskirts, Tombra's mind raced with a storm of numbers, greed, and anticipation, imagining the thick bundles of naira, dollars, and pounds that would soon fill their secret. While Priya fidgeted nervously beside her, every instinct screaming that they were dancing on the edge of a razor. Yet he could not speak against the woman whose ambition now ruled their home, and far away, Prima, the young and cunning wife of their wealthy uncle, received a phone call that would reveal her true character. The raw voice of the kidnappers calmly stating that her husband was in their custody and 50 million naira was required for his release. And while a normal wife might scream, beg, or collapse into fear, Prima's mind sharpened like a blade in the night, immediately calculating a way to exploit this situation to her advantage, lying smoothly that she did not have the money, claiming even if she sold her businesses, she could not gather the sum, a statement that froze the kidnappers for a moment in disbelief, while Tombra, hearing this through Ratio's updates, clenched her fists in delight, knowing that Prima's greed and desperation would perfectly complement her own. And over the following hours, negotiations unfolded like a deadly dance. Messages exchanged with icy precision, Prima hinting she might consider darker options, promising bonuses to ensure the deed was done if the captors succeeded, while secretly plotting her escape with Faye, her young lover, and Tombra, sensing that every act of deceit in this chain could be manipulated, leaned closer to Priya, whispering strategies, instructing Ratio to keep Chief Abakimi alive, but ensure Prima suffered through fear, confusion, and controlled desperation, orchestrating a scheme where the husband's release would not only enrich them but also serve as punishment to the wicked wife, all while Priya's stomach churned in moral torment, realizing that they were no longer merely thieves but conductors of chaos that intertwined family, greed, and cruelty into a deadly symphony. And as days passed, each communication with Prima revealed more of her cunning nature, the way she considered murder, manipulation, and deceit as tools, showing Tambra that even greater wealth could be harvested if calculated patience was exercised. And so the plan evolved. Chief Abikimi would be released temporarily, but the ultimate trap for Prima herself would be set, promising a windfall beyond what Tambra's siblings had ever carried, while the universe, silent and observant, seemed to hum a warning that for every act of betrayal, revenge, or accident could strike back. Yet Tambra ignored this, moving like a shadow across her tiny home, calculating every movement, while outside, worry buzzed in normal life, unaware that within one room, plans were being drawn that would soon engulf the entire family in fear, greed, and desperation. Because Tambra had learned that power lay not in wealth alone, but in controlling the hands that reached for it. And as Ratio confirmed that Chief Abikimi was still unharmed, but well aware of the terror surrounding him, Tambra's lips curved in a satisfied, almost feral smile, for, in her mind, this orchestration was flawless, a symphony of manipulation where every note, every cry, every frightened glance served her ultimate aim. Yet hidden beneath the thrill was the ever-present possibility that even the cleverest plans could unravel, that the wolf who believed himself at the top could stumble over one misstep, that in greed's jungle the predator could become prey. And while Tambra's hands were steady, her calculations precise, and her patience deadly, the story around her was beginning to pulse with tension so thick that even the bravest reader could feel the air tighten, every heartbeat echoing the looming collision of crime, betrayal, family love turned sour, and the catastrophic consequences that were silently assembling in the shadows. Because the game they were playing was no longer simple theft, but a dangerous dance with fate itself, and each whisper, lie, and secret payment was a step closer to the inevitable moment when all masks would fall, when every hidden motive would surface, and when the forest of worry, both literal and moral, would witness the chaos that greed and betrayal had sown, leaving both villains and victims to face the consequences of choices too dark to be undone. As the week crept forward with the tension of a snake coiled to strike, Tambra's mind became a steel trap of cunning, calculating every possible move to ensnare Prima, the young, wicked wife of her wealthy uncle. For now she realized that the final, largest fortune awaited in the hands of this ambitious, careless woman who thought she could manipulate life as easily as she managed her businesses. And while Priya fidgeted nervously beside her, feeling the weight of crimes growing heavier on his conscience, Tambra smiled like a predator who had scented the blood of her prey, instructing Ratio and his gang with meticulous precision, mapping Prima's every habit, every hidden rendezvous with her lover, Faye, the hotels she preferred, the streets she frequented, and the patterns of her guards, while the city of Wari pulsed unaware outside. Life continuing, children laughing, street hawkers calling, while inside Tambra's small, cluttered house, a dark plan took shape. A plan to strike at the heart of ambition itself. And as the kidnappers waited in shadows, observing the mansion from across the street, Prima's phone buzzed repeatedly. Messages she ignored, for she believed she was untouchable, a queen of manipulation. Yet she was blind to the storm gathering just beyond her golden gates. And then the moment arrived. Prima left the mansion to meet Feya in a discreet hotel, driving her sleek car without knowledge of the silent observers. And as she turned onto a narrow lane flanked by overgrown hedges, the van appeared, dark, silent, and sudden, forcing her to halt. And before she could react, masked figures emerged from the shadows like specters, smashing the car window, dragging her screaming into the vehicle with hands as firm as iron. Her expensive perfume mixing with the scent of fear and dust. While she yelled for help, her calls swallowed by the night, echoing into silence. And back at Tambra's house, she and Priya watched every movement on a small, dim laptop screen, faces glowing with malicious delight, knowing that finally the ultimate prize was within their grasp. And as Prima struggled in the back of the van, fury and terror mingling in her eyes, she realized too late that her wealth, her cunning, and her disregard for morality had led her into a trap orchestrated by someone she had never imagined could be so ruthless. And Tambra whispered to Priya, her voice cold and sweet like poison. Now, we show her what it feels like to fear for every breath while knowing her husband, her fortune, and her pride are in our hands. While Priya swallowed hard, conscience gnawing at him like termites in wood, yet fear kept his lips sealed, because his wife's ambition had become an unstoppable force. And as the van sped through Backstreet, taking Prima to a safe house unknown to anyone, the tension thickened. For every second brought her closer to the reality of ransom, bargaining, and humiliation. And in Tambra's mind, every detail was already accounted for. The message to her uncle, the instructions to re-show the security measures to ensure no one could trace the operation, and the silent calculation of the millions to be extracted. While outside, the city lights flickered against the van's dark surface, a faint witness to the terror unfolding within. And even as Prima cursed, screamed, and plotted revenge in her mind, Tambra and Priya felt the intoxicating rush of power, the thrill of control over life and fortune, while the moral weight of their actions pressed only lightly against their consciousness. For greed had long since blinded them, and in that long, tense night, the trap had been set. The ultimate act of extortion begun, and with Prima now in their grasp, the story of Tambra's dark empire escalated to heights of suspense, danger, and the kind of fear that could chill the blood of anyone who imagined themselves untouchable. Because in Wari, under the cover of shadows, a battle of wills, money, and survival was unfolding. A game where every move could be the difference between life and death, freedom and captivity. And as Tambra watched, whispering her orders, the reader could feel the air thicken with impending doom, knowing that the consequences of ambition, greed, and betrayal were about to converge in an explosive, unforgettable collision that would leave no one in the family unscarred. The following morning, Tambra awoke with a sharp edge to her thoughts, her mind humming like a blacksmith's forge, because Prima was now in their control, the ultimate piece in a game of greed, power, and revenge. And as she sipped her bitter coffee, Priya fidgeted nervously beside her, worry gnawing at his gut like a rat in a pantry, while Tambra's eyes glimmered with anticipation, calculating every detail of the ransom. The fear that would ripple through her uncle's mansion once the demand was made, the tension, the chaos, the panic that would erupt when 50 million naira was requested, and every second ticked like a drumbeat of doom. And as Ratio updated her from the field, confirming Prima was secured in the hidden safe house, Tambra began to draft the message that would strike terror into the heart of the woman who had plotted to betray her own husband, crafting every word to convey control, menace, and an unshakable authority. While outside, Wari buzzed in ignorant normalcy, cars honking, children playing, street vendors shouting their wares, completely unaware that in a shadowed room, a young woman held power over thousands of lives with nothing more than a phone. And when the message was finally sent to Chief Abakimi, the old man's eyes widened in horror, heart hammering like a war drum as he read that his wife, Prima, had been captured and 50 million naira was demanded for her safe release. A demand that seemed impossible, absurd, terrifying. And the mansion erupted in chaos. Servants running, security guards frantic, phones ringing endlessly, and Chief Abekami pacing like a caged lion, realizing that in an instant the life he had built with sweat, skill, and careful maneuvering was vulnerable to greed and cunning beyond imagination. While Tambra sat across town with Priya, eyes shining with malicious satisfaction, noting every ripple of fear that spread through the family, and Prima herself, tied, humiliated, trapped, realized for the first time that her manipulations and scheming had turned against her, that the predator she had underestimated now held all the cards. And as negotiations began, with phone calls exchanged, threats whispered, and ultimatums laid out like sharpened spears, the tension reached a fever pitch. For every delay, every hesitation, every counteroffer was a pulse of terror coursing through the family's veins. And while Chief Abakimi scrambled to gather the ransom, selling assets, calling in favors, liquidating investments, Tambra's mind danced in delight at the unfolding chaos, knowing that not only would the money flow into their secret accounts, but that Prima would suffer, humiliated, stripped of her power, and faced with consequences she had never imagined. Yet, as the day stretched into night, cracks began to appear in Tambra's carefully built empire of fear. For Priya's unease grew into outright panic, whispers of conscience gnawing at him like termites in rotten wood. And in that tension, even Tambra felt a flicker, a tiny warning that greed could blind even the cleverest, that fate could turn suddenly, unpredictably, and that the higher the climb, the harsher the fall. Yet she ignored it, consumed by the thrill, the intoxicating power of controlling life, death, and wealth, while outside the city carried on, oblivious to the storm of human emotion, desperation, and fear swirling just beyond their sight. And, as the ransom was delivered, stacks of bills, foreign currency, trembling hands counting every note, the family shaken to their core, Tambra and Priya retreated to their secret haven, hearts pounding with triumph, yet shadows of dread now crept in. For the closer they got to ultimate control, the closer they edged to exposure, betrayal, or worse. And in that delicate, perilous balance, the story's tension exploded like lightning in a dark sky. The reader feeling the pulse of greed, the weight of human desperation, the peril of ambition unchecked, and the looming sense that in Wari, under the heavy African sun and the cloak of shadows, no one, neither villain, victim, nor bystander, would emerge unscathed. Because in a world where loyalty is sold for currency and ambition guides every hand, the next move could unleash disaster of unimaginable scale, and Tombra, for all her cunning, began to realize that even the most calculated schemes can spiral, and that the game she played with family, greed, and betrayal might soon turn with a force that no planning, no money, no cunning could control. The sun rose over Wari like a blazing eye, indifferent to human schemes. Yet inside Tombra's secret mansion on the outskirts, a storm of greed, fear, and fate was about to collide in a cataclysm that no one could have predicted. For Prima, now trembling in the hidden safe, had not only been humiliated and controlled, but had begun whispering to Resho's men, planting seeds of rebellion, threatening exposure, while Tombra paced like a caged lioness, calculating every ransom, every threat, every twist of deception, convinced that she held the absolute power, and Priya, now pale and hollow-eyed, realized too late that they had stirred a hornet's nest far beyond what their cunning could handle. For the siblings they had extorted, the uncle whose wife had plotted against him, the city itself buzzing with rumors and fear, had begun to unravel their empire from every angle. And as the first message arrived from one of the kidnapped siblings, bruised but alive, threatening to go to the police if any further harm came to anyone, Tombra's hands shook, though her eyes remained sharp, calculating contingencies, while outside Wari seemed calm, the streets alive with the ordinary life of hawkers, children, and car horns, completely unaware that in one shadowed corner, morality, vengeance, and greed were dancing a deadly tango. And the tension escalated when Chief Abik, recovering from his ordeal, sent a warning through a lawyer, hinting at full police involvement and private security investigators tracing every transaction, every call, every movement connected to the kidnappings. And Tombra's mind raced faster than a hunting cheetah, imagining the collapse of their carefully curated wealth, the exposure, the fury of families wronged. And yet, in that same moment, Prima, now secretly collaborating with Rescio out of fear and ambition, orchestrated a counterplot, feeding misinformation, setting traps within traps, turning the hunters into the hunted. And as chaos spiraled, Priya whispered, trembling Tombra, "Maybe we've gone too far," but she waved him away, eyes glittering like shards of obsidian, ignoring the gnawing fear that they were no longer in control, that every plan, every scheme, every moment of greed could snap into disaster. And then it happened. The police, tipped off anonymously, traced one of the safe houses surrounding the mansion with flashing blue lights, helicopters buzzing overhead, while the kidnapped siblings and Prima's accomplices began to reveal the truth, the entire operation collapsing like a house of cards in a violent wind. And Tombra, realizing the empire she had built from manipulation, fear, and money was crumbling, shouted instructions to Raish, but confusion and betrayal had already spread among the men. some turning on each other, others surrendering to the authorities, while Priya, sweating and pale, tried to calm her, tried to reason with her. But the tidal wave of consequences was unstoppable, and in the final hours, as police stormed the mansion, shouting commands, flashbangs, exploding, the money, the cars, the mansion, the illusions of power all came crashing down. Prima's face appearing on screens across Wari, smug and victorious, exposing Tambra. The siblings finally united, stronger for the ordeal, watching as greed, deception, and cruelty met justice, and Tambra, standing in the chaos she had created, realized the bitter truth that no empire built on manipulation and fear could ever stand. That the higher the climb on the ladder of treachery, the farther the fall, and as she was escorted out, handcuffed, the weight of every crime, every lie, every stolen naira, every moment of greed pressing upon her, the elder's words echoed in her mind. That daylight always comes after the night. That the dog who kills one chicken will one day be caught. And Wari returned slowly to its ordinary rhythm, but the story of Tambra, Priya, and the kidnapped siblings would be told for years, a dark African tale of ambition, betrayal, greed, and justice, a warning whispered in every household, a legend of the consequences when human desire is left unchecked, when family ties are betrayed, and when the jungle of greed devours the hearts of those too blinded to see the dawn. And in that cautionary tale, the reader could feel every heartbeat, every trembling hand, every moment of panic, and know that in the end, even the cleverest, the most ruthless, the most ambitious, must face the reckoning that life, fate, and morality deliver with unstoppable force.